things are? God is good? Everything going okay? We have another day of life, yes? Yes. Amen. I love the fall time. Fall is special. Special for a number of reasons, but one main reason. You know, when the air gets that little chill, and there's that damp in the air, and then the leaves start to change to beautiful colors, and of course the days start getting a little shorter, then you know what's coming, right? Yes. And I get excited about that because you know what's coming, that means Jesus is coming. That's what it means to me. I know you were thinking of something else, but the reason why fall means that Jesus is coming to me is because I remember our heritage, and I remember William Miller, and I remember the message and the movement and what was supposed to happen October 22, 1844. And the interesting thing is that, you know, William Miller never set a date. He never accepted the idea of setting a date. That was other people's idea. He just believed that Jesus was coming sometime around 1843, and then when they realized they missed the zero date, then he realized it was sometime around 1844. What's interesting that William Miller never set a date, and I find that intriguing. And one of the things that excites about me, because the fall means that the fall feast, that's why I love to study the fall feast. Feast of Trumpets, Day of Atonement, and Rosh Hashanah, the day, or Feast of Booths, right? Rosh Hashanah, the Feast of Booths just ended last week. It was last Tuesday, I think it was, right? So the reason I love the fall, and what it always reminds me is it reminds me of the fall feast, reminds me of the heritage. I've been studying these things for years, and I just appreciate it. And it's interesting to me that William Miller never set a date, and that during the years of 1844, and even after the time of 1844, he would awaken every day, and he would say to himself, today might be the day. And you know what he did every day? He prepared his heart every day to make sure that if today was the day that Jesus came, that he would be ready for Jesus to come. Isn't that amazing? You know, they called him Father Miller. He was a great man, and he was a great man because he loved Jesus. I don't know if you've ever read anything William Miller, but the way he talks about Jesus, it just melted your heart. He loved Jesus, and he longed for Jesus' appearing. And so the idea of fall, what it means to me, is that Jesus is coming. And by the way, it doesn't matter what season Jesus comes, it will be fall, because that would be the Feast of Tabernacles, right? So that happens in the fall. It's just like the day that Jesus comes, no matter what time he comes in the day, it's always going to be morning, right? Because it's the morning when Jesus comes, because he's so bright, the sky, the sun's just going to look like a pale little thing in the sky, right? It'll be sunrise, right? That's just beautiful. Well, why do I share these things with you? Well, you know, it's fall, and I'm thinking of the fall feast, and I'm going to be sharing some ideas with you today. But it's going to come from a story that you're not really going to associate with the fall feast. So I really need to challenge your thinking here a little bit. And if you'll turn with me, well, let's pray first, and I'll open the Word of God. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for another beautiful day of life. We know that you're coming soon. I just praise you and worship you, and I want to be one of those people, like William Miller, like our founders, who actually dared to believe that now is the time for Christ's coming. To dare to believe and dare to allow that truth to transform the choices that I make and the things that I do, so that perhaps I could be ready when Jesus comes. Please bless us with your Holy Spirit as we open your word. Challenge our hearts and our minds to see your great love for us, to see your forgiveness, to see your compassion, but to also see your desire to save a dying world. Just bless us with your presence as we open your word in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. So you're opening your Bible to Matthew chapter 8, verse 1. I've only chosen four short verses. So it should be maybe a short sermon if I don't wax too eloquent, right? Yes. So, again, it just intrigues me, our heritage. Our forefathers dared to believe that now was the time that Jesus was coming. Think of that. They believed that Jesus was coming now. And they believed, and therefore, because they believed it, it transformed the way they lived their life. If you believe Jesus was coming, if Jesus was coming in 3 days, if you believe that, would you change what you're doing today? Would you change what you're doing tomorrow? Would it alter the way you think about the things that you're doing, the way you invest your time, your money, your energy, the way that you talk to or don't talk to your friends, the way you reach out to your neighbors or don't reach out to your neighbors? Would that change the way you think? I think it would. And I'm sure that that's what the Lord wants us to be doing in terms of transforming our thinking, the way we look at other people, the way we would hopefully reach out to other people. That's why I started this, Jesus filled with compassion reached out. That actually comes from the Mark version of the story. We're going to look at the leper story in Matthew 8, verses 1 through 4. This phrase actually comes from Mark's story in Mark 1, verse 41, where it says when Jesus saw the leper, he said he was filled with compassion and he reached out. Filled with compassion. I love that idea. Right? So, Matthew 8, verse 1. And it says, when he, and who's the he? Jesus. So we're talking about the right thing. We're actually the right person. It says, when he, Jesus, had come down from the mountain. What mountain is he coming down from? Transfiguration. No, you jumped a little bit. That's Matthew 17. No. When you go back to Matthew chapter 5, and Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7 is the Sermon on the Mount. Sermon on the Mount. Very good. So Jesus is coming down from the mountain. He's on the sermon. He's been on the mountain, the Sermon on the Mount. Now, this it's important in terms of the symbolism and the imagery that's going on here, because Matthew is trying to put into our minds a truth that we may not see and may not catch if we don't read closely. Jesus is coming down from the mountain, but Jesus, it's not just Jesus coming down from the mountain, it's somebody else that's coming down from the mountain. Okay? Well, let me show you. He gives you the hint. If you look in verse 4, he mentions somebody's name specifically.
Chapter 8.
Matthew chapter 8, we're looking at verse 4. He mentions somebody's name. Moses. You see, when Jesus goes up the mountain, if you go to Matthew chapter 5, verse 1, it says, and seeing the multitudes, he, Jesus, went up the mountain, and when he was seated, his disciples came unto him, and then he opened his mouth and began to teach them, and then he begins the Beatitudes. What he's telling us, Matthew is telling us that this is about the kingdom, and he's using Moses. Jesus is following the footsteps of Moses. Notice what he says, the first Beatitude, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the
kingdom.
The kingdom. If you want to know more about the kingdom, we're having a study about that on Thursday evenings. This is rich with kingdom dynamic stuff. And some of it you're not going to understand because we haven't got there yet, but I certainly, I'm going to try to allude to it. I can't help but share it. But anyway, the idea here is that if you look at the story of Matthew, he talks about out of Egypt I have called my son, and then he talks about Jesus going into Egypt, and then Jesus comes out of Egypt, and then he's baptized. That's the Red Sea. And then after the Red Sea, a baptism and the temptation in the wilderness for 40 days, because Israel went with Moses into the wilderness. Then after he has that experience, then the next thing he's going to have is called the Sinai experience in Exodus. And here's the Sinai experience, Matthew 5, 6, and 7 is the Sinai experience and does Jesus refer to the law at Sinai? He says the law says, thou shalt not commit adultery, but I say, the law says thou shalt not murder, but I say, so does Jesus do away with the law? No, he makes it more real, more personable, right? So it's not just the behavior on the outside, he's challenging us to look on the inside. So here, the new Moses is on the mountain. He's instructing people about the law of the new kingdom. And this kingdom dynamic, this kingdom idea is in Matthew's mind because it's in Jesus' mind. And so Jesus is the Moses who's on the mountain. And then Moses is going to come down the mountain. What happened when Moses came down the mountain?
People were...
Well, yeah, you're thinking of Exodus 32, that's right. They were worshiping the golden calf. But after he goes up the mountain again, and they wait, by the way, another 40 days, because he's up on the mountain making atonement for their sin. Then he comes down the mountain. What happens this time? His face is glowing, yes. And what happens to the people?
They're afraid.
He comes down the mountain and they part like water, right? Because they're afraid, because Moses didn't realize that the glory of God is shining on his face, right? Yeah. So here's the new Moses. This is the new Moses, and he's coming down the mountain. But the beauty of this is, and I need to connect this with you. I got some pictures. Do you guys like when I do the picture thing? Yeah. You do? Okay. Because you're the only church, somehow I feel compelled to do PowerPoints so you can see pictures. The other churches I don't. And I'm just wondering if it's a blessing to you or not. I hope it is. I'm a visual person myself. So this is the law of the new kingdom. And here's our new Moses. He's on the mountain. He's receiving law. He's instructing from the law, right? And then, of course, he's going to come down the mountain. And when Moses came down the mountain, you know, that's kind of what it looked like, I guess. This was a picture to give you an idea that the glory of God is shining from his face. It's shining so brightly that the people are afraid to encounter Moses. All right? Now, what's interesting here, and I want to, if you look at Matthew chapter 8 through 9, you're actually dealing with another section. Now, we have our Moses that we know is on the mountain, right? And are we waiting for our Moses to come down from the mountain?
Yes.
Yeah, is his face going to be shining when he comes down? Yeah. Hopefully we're not going to be running away in fear, right? Right. So we await our Moses to come down from the mountain. Now, what's interesting is I remember Moses was on the mountain to make atonement for the children of Israel's sin. What's happening here, Jesus is on the mountain, but Matthew is mixing the imagery of the Passover Sinai imagery with the imagery of the Day of Atonement and the cleansing of the temple idea. You'll notice in the story I have over here, you'll notice in the story 3 times he's going to use the idea of being cleansed or clean, right? The Day of Atonement has to do with the cleansing of the temple. And Matthew picks up this idea, picks up this concept that as Jesus comes down, there's a process of Jesus' coming. And some haven't figured that out yet, but that's what I'm trying to kind of put that thought in people's minds. There's a process to his coming. And the process to his coming has everything to do with what happens to us in that process. And so there's this cleansing process, the cleansing of the temple process, right? And is the cleansing of the temple a cleansing of a building? No. What is the temple that's to be cleansed? Yeah, there you go. This is the cleansing of the temple imagery. So what happens here is that this Moses is coming down the mountain, and what Matthew does is he connects these ideas of the cleansing with as our Moses comes down the mountain, there's going to be healing and restoration that takes place. And so this section, Matthew 5 through 7, deals with the Sermon on the Mount, but Matthew 8 and 9 deal with healing. I just want to bring your attention to some of this. Notice he heals the leper, and then he's going to start this story, and I'll get into the details. But then he heals the centurion's servant. Next he heals Peter's mother-in-law. Then he heals the many that are healed that come to his house in the evening. Then again, he heals the demon-possessed man in the end of Matthew chapter 8. Then he heals the paralytic in Matthew chapter 9. Then he heals the woman, Jairus' daughter is restored to life. And while he's doing that, he also heals the woman with the uncleanness. And then he heals the 2 blind men. And then he heals the man that speaks. Are you getting a message?
Yes.
When the king comes down the mountain, is there an opportunity to be healed?
Amen.
By the way, is that good news? I don't see you smiling.
Praise the Lord.
Praise the Lord.
Would you be interested if the king came and said, would you like to be healed? What would you tell him? No, I like the way I am. I'll stay broken. Is that what, right? No. Now notice. So this section of 8 and 9, after 8 and 9, Matthew switches and he starts talking about discipleship and how Jesus is going to teach his disciples and train his disciples and talk to them about being messengers as well. And then after that section, in 13 and 14, he's going to start with parables and he's going to start giving. So Matthew is actually telling us a process that Jesus, the King, is doing not only to heal, but to teach and then prepare us to be messengers. And then the stories that will give parables of the kingdom. And he's going to talk about the kingdom and the kingdom and the kingdom. If you notice in Matthew 9, I'll end with this so I can get back to our story. If you look at verses 35 and 36, these verses summarize these healings and what the point that Matthew is getting across. So he says, then Jesus went about, and he's going to use these inclusive words, all the cities and villages, and he did three things. Now, you don't know yet, but the kingdom has three parts. So whenever you see the three parts, that's why the three cleansing is important. You're going to see Jesus doing three things here at the end of Matthew, and I'll be bringing your attention to the more threes through the sermon, through the talk. But you'll notice that Jesus does three things. He says he went about in all the cities and villages. He was teaching in the synagogues. He was preaching or proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom. By the way, that's important. You say, oh, the gospel's going to go to the whole world and Jesus will come. No, that's not what it says. You read the text correctly in Matthew 24. It says the gospel of the kingdom will go to the whole world, and then the end will come. Right? It's the gospel of the kingdom. Yeah, we haven't understood that. That's why part of the reason we're still stuck here, right? But anyway, notice this is the second part. He's proclaiming or preaching the gospel of the kingdom. And then the third part that he's doing, which is proclaiming the kingdom, is that it says he healed what? Every or all sicknesses and every and all diseases among the people. Notice when Jesus, when our King comes down the mountain, is there any sickness or disease that he does not cure? No. Yeah, isn't that beautiful?
Amen.
Yeah, that's good. Just think about that for a minute. Isn't that beautiful? Amen. Okay, so the story of the leper in verses 1 through 4 begins Matthew's introduction of the king that comes down the mountain and heals and restores, and it's going to tell us specific information about how the king heals and how he restores and what is the condition necessary for us to receive that healing, to receive that restoration. Are you interested in that? Yeah, me too. So let's go through our short story and see if how long it takes us to understand what he's saying. So he says, did I get my emphasis here? Yeah, well, there's the three angels' messages. Yeah, you're going to hear me talking about the three, right? So here's the three angels' messages in Matthew 9. He's teaching, he's proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom, and he's healing every sickness, every disease. Everybody that has a need, that's willing to accept him, they receive restoration and life. Does that have anything to do with the three angels' messages?
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen.
Yes, it does. So, our king is coming down the mountain, and says, great multitudes followed him, and behold, a leper. I have some pictures of what a leper looks like. Leprosy was a contagious disease that was incurable. It was a sentence of death. In the Old Testament, if you had leprosy, then you were considered a dead person. You did not exist anymore. You were dead to your family. You were dead to society. You were dead. You did not exist. You were to leave society of your family, society of people. You were to live out in the wilderness, and you would live out on your own. And you, if you ever encountered people, you were supposed to tear your clothes and yell, unclean, unclean, and everybody would run away from you because they did not want to catch leprosy. Right? Now, leprosy, by the way, is still around in our world. They figure there's about 150 million people on the earth that still has leprosy, but it's mostly in third world countries like Asia and Africa, India and Africa. I've been to India. I've seen some of the beggars on the streets have leprosy, and the no fingers. It's true. What happens in leprosy? Your skin gets scaly and stiff, and what happens? You literally start decaying. And so the ends of your fingers fall off, and then more of your finger falls off, or your nose may fall off, or your ear falls off. And what happens is these people became very unseemly, very scary in terms of presentation. And so this idea of becoming a leper, they actually believed, and they were actually taught that this was a judgment of God. That this was the finger of God was upon them, that they were being cursed because of their sin, that not only were they dead, not acceptable to their family, not acceptable to their friends, they couldn't communicate with anybody, they couldn't touch or be touched, anybody. Not only that, but they were under the curse of God, that God did not love them, God did not accept them, God did not value them, God did not care about them. They had no hope to be saved, no hope to be accepted. They were lost, helpless and hopeless, with no hope. You see why people feared leprosy. The Bible uses, and Mrs. White describes leprosy as a symbol of sin itself. Sin results in death, right? And sin has cut us off from God, and sin causes all these issues. So when it says that, behold, a leper, there isn't a worst-case scenario that the king could encounter when he came down the mountain than when he encountered a leper, right? Then it says, behold a leper. And then it says that this leper came. Now, I want you to spend a minute thinking about the challenges that this leper had. He lived out away from society. He didn't talk to people. So how is he going to know where Jesus is? How's he going to know? Jesus is a wandering teacher, right? So how is this leper going to find Jesus? How's this leper going to know where Jesus is and locate him so he can find him and then he can actually ask him to heal him? How is the leper going to find him? It's like walking around Vermont trying to find Dom. How's that going to happen? And you can't talk to anybody. No, you just have to walk around and find him on your own. That sounds like a little bit impossible, doesn't it?
Couldn't the lepers come through town as long as they had like bells or something on it?
Well, they would have to yell unclean, unclean, but usually what they had is like, when they would have little groups of lepers, like later Jesus is going to encounter 10 lepers and they're going to be in a certain place. There was these kind of like little leper colonies, and people, gracious people, would go out and leave food for them so they had something to eat. But they didn't go into town. If they encountered people, they would be crying unclean, unclean, and it was very uncomfortable, very socially unacceptable for them to go into villages, because then you have little kids and all this other stuff, and people did not want these contagious people around anybody, right? So they stayed out into lonely places. They were basically isolated and all alone. They lived alone, right? They were basically walking dead people. That's what they were. So this leper has these huge, great challenges to find Jesus. That should be very interesting. Do you have any challenges finding Jesus in your life? Yeah, there's these huge challenges. And he's tempted to give up. Oh, this is too much. This is impossible. I can't do this. It's too much work. It's too hard. But no, he hears stories that Jesus has healed people, that Jesus accepts people. And he starts... in his mind, this faith starts growing that, you know what, perhaps Jesus would even accept me. Perhaps Jesus would forgive me. Perhaps Jesus would even heal me. Maybe Jesus would accept me. And so he determines in his mind he's going to find Jesus. He determines in his mind he's going to find Jesus. Now, by the way, who is drawing the leper to Jesus? It's God. The Holy Spirit is drawing the leper to Jesus. Now, he doesn't recognize it. He doesn't realize it. But that which is impossible is not impossible with God. God is the one drawing him. By the way, God's the one drawing you to him. Amen. Right? And so God is drawing this leper. Now, it's not just the impossibility of trying to find him, but it's also the social stigma connected with the idea of trying to encounter Jesus. The leper has to deal with this risk factor that what if I go and present myself to Jesus and he says, you're a sinner, you're under the curse of God, I'm not accepting you, why are you here? You're not supposed to be here. Right? By the way, has he encountered that before? What do you think the priests said to him, or these religious leaders were saying to him when he showed up? Right? So does he have that doubt in his mind that maybe, just maybe, I'm not good enough, I'm not acceptable enough, I'm not going to be accepted? Does he have that risk? And then when he does find Jesus, you'll notice it says it's a great multitude follows Jesus. So he has to not only deal with his own inward deal of pressure and stress and doubt and fears, trying to diminish his faith, but he also deals with the social pressure. When he's walking towards Jesus, the crowd is telling him, are they saying, oh, hi, and being nice to him? No. What are you doing here? You're not supposed to be here. And they actually try to stop him. There's all kinds of pressure for him not to come into the presence of people and to come into the presence of Jesus. And this is why he says the disciples try to stop him from coming to Jesus. They're afraid for Jesus because he has leprosy. And what's interesting here is that this leper has to he's convinced himself, he's set it in his mind, and he's determined. He set his mind like flint. He's going to find Jesus. He's going to encounter Jesus. He's not going to allow anything or anyone else to stop him from finding Jesus. He's going to fix his mind. He's like a man that doesn't hear. He's like a man that doesn't see. He's not stopping. He doesn't care what the distractions are. He doesn't care what other people say. He doesn't care what other people think. He doesn't care what society says is right or wrong, is okay or not okay. He does not care. He is going to find Jesus. He has to find Jesus.
Amen. Amen.
So it says, behold, think about this. A leper came.
Yeah.
He finds Jesus. It says the leper came and worshiped.
Wow.
Amazing. A leper came. He fights through all those barriers, and he comes and he worships. Now, we don't really catch this in our culture, but to worship means to lay yourself prostrate before God. That's what the word worship literally means. Now, Mark will say that he came and knelt. But see, Matthew catches the connotation correctly. He comes to worship. He has fixed his mind. He's going to find Jesus at all costs because Jesus is his only hope. And when he finds Jesus, he lays himself before Jesus. He surrenders everything. He gives everything. There's nothing. There's no pride. There's no selfishness. There's nothing that he's holding on to. There's nothing more valuable. Jesus is everything to him. And he's not interested in anything or anyone else. He's interested in Jesus. Yeah. And so when he comes, he worships Jesus. He lays himself in front of Jesus. And notice the words that come from his mouth. He says, Lord. Now, if you know anything about the Gospel of Matthew and the other Gospels, Mark, the story of the leper is in Mark chapter 1. This is right after the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus has just begun his ministry. How many people are calling Jesus Lord? How many people are acknowledging Jesus as a self-existing eternal one, the King of creation, the Savior of the world, the Messiah? How many people? Not very many. The disciples haven't even figured out what's going on at this point. Right? The discussion that Jesus, when he turns and says, who do you say that I am to his disciples? That happens later. Right? So the disciples are still wrestling. They don't even realize who Jesus is yet. But the leper understands something. His need has brought him to realization of a truth that others have not yet seen. And he bows himself, lays himself in front of Jesus, and he says, Lord. Wow.